the practice of public relations today, I think, raises some important questions about what impact public relations has on our democracy today. And I think there's a few big questions here. First, what impact does public relations have on the relationship of government officials with their constituents and with citizens? Can we say that public relations encourages government leaders to be more responsive to the concerns of citizens? Or is public relations used by politicians and government leaders to avoid accountability and avoid responding to the concerns of their constituents? Here, some critics have noted that increasingly politicians hire public relations firms to improve their images. So anytime, for instance, a government leader gets into hot water, when a congressperson gets involved in an extramarital affair or is accused of corruption, that government leader or politician will immediately go to public relations, hire a PR firm to manage all of the negative press. And in this process, some critics argue that politicians try to circumvent the role of the press. I mean, historically, we've relied on the news media and journalists to ask tough questions of our government leaders, to hold them accountable for the things that they do. Some argue that increasingly politicians are trying to just go around news media by managing their information and public image through public relations. And on the Blackboard site for this class, I have an article by Frank Bruni of the New York Times. Bruni argues that increasingly politicians are avoiding talking directly to the press because the press asks very uncomfortable questions. Instead, politicians will try to directly communicate with their constituents through slick videos that are shown online. And of course, those videos are produced by public relations professionals. Michelle Bachmann, for instance, when she announced that she was going to not seek another term in office, she made that announcement through a slick video that she released online. And again, for Michelle Bachmann, that avoided any tough questions about the reasons for her leaving politics or government at this time. So again, the question is, does public relations encourage politicians to avoid being accountable to their constituents? And are politicians using public relations as a way to avoid being directly questioned by the news media? I think there's also questions about free expression and the diversity of ideas in society. One of the things that we've found in this chapter is that public relations professionals in their media relations efforts try very hard to influence the news media to provide very favorable coverage of their clients and favorable coverage of the views of their clients. And studies have shown that these PR firms have been pretty successful in their media relations activities. Public relations firms that lobby news media have been pretty successful in getting news media outlets, TV news and newspapers, to cover their clients' views positions and version of events. Well, I guess a question here is, does that attempt by public relations to manipulate and influence the news media skew the news in certain directions? Do news organizations then wind up over-representing the views of clients whose activities have been supported by public relations firms? Do news organizations provide more coverage of these clients that are so forcefully supported by public relations? And then this goes back to the issue of money. That throughout this chapter, it's clear that hiring a public relations firm costs a lot of money, and public relations firms tend to disproportionately represent the interests of large corporations and the wealthy. Does that then mean that because of the efforts of public relations, that news organizations are providing more coverage and attention to issues of concern to corporations and elite interests? And are news media providing greater representation of the views of these corporate interests that are supported by public relations? The flip side to this is the concern that sectors of society that do not have money, political activists, lower income groups, minority groups, are the views of those segments of society underrepresented in news media because those groups can't afford the high cost of public relations firms that would conduct media relations efforts. So, again, a question about whether or not public relations skews the range of ideas and views represented not only in our news media, but our media more generally. Now, I think it's also important to call into question the role of news organizations and journalists in this process, if indeed this is the case. I mean, in the defense of public relations, we could simply say, well, hey, it's the job of the public relations professional to try and promote the interests of their corporate client and to do so in their media relations campaigns. Perhaps it's news organizations and journalists that are too willing to provide this over-representation of the clients of PR firms. Perhaps journalists are too willing to simply just use the press release or the video news release that are offered to them by the PR firm. I mean, one of the things that some critics argue is that journalists are a little too lazy, that rather than do their own investigative reporting, a lot of times they will just kind of rely on the information provided by these public relations firms. So perhaps news organizations are to blame here as well in terms of not doing the hard work of independent reporting. We also need to look at the parent firms of news organizations and how increasingly these parent firms have engaged in pretty extensive budget cuts where news organizations have been forced to lay off lots of reporters and journalists. Perhaps that cost cutting and cutbacks in journalism and reporting then contributes to this tendency of news organizations to rely too much on these materials provided by public relations firms on behalf of their corporate clients. So again, questions for us about what impact public relations has on our democratic society, and ultimately, is that influence desirable, or do we see certain problems there? Something for us to talk about.